On a warm evening in Los Angeles, Beyoncé hosted a special private party at one of her luxurious homes. It was the kind of event that invited only the most important names in the entertainment industry. The music was playing softly, the air filled with laughter, and the guests mingled with drinks in hand, enjoying a night of celebration. Everything seemed perfect, like a scene from a movie. But little did everyone know, a surprise guest was about to disrupt the calm atmosphere. As the evening went on, a sleek black car pulled up at the entrance. The security guards, who had been scanning the guest list all night, glanced up as the vehicle came to a stop. They saw a familiar face get out, Kanye West. He wasn't on the guest list, and no one had given him an invitation. His arrival, unannounced, caught everyone off guard. Security wasn't sure how to handle the situation. They had been given strict instructions to only allow invited guests into the party, and Kanye had clearly not received an invitation. He stood confidently in front of the gates, not appearing worried or anxious. Instead, he seemed calm and collected, as though he expected to be let in without question. He walked up to the guards, who stood firm, unsure of what to do. "I'm here for the party," Kanye said, not asking but stating it as if it were a fact. His usual confidence was unmistakable. The guards hesitated. They knew who he was, but they had a job to do. They explained that without an invitation, they couldn't allow him in. Kanye was used to getting what he wanted, and this was just another moment where he would have to convince others to bend the rules. But no matter how he tried to explain, the answer was the same: no invite, no entry. The tension outside grew. Guests inside the party were unaware of what was happening at the front gate. Everyone was too busy enjoying the night to know that a moment of potential drama was unfolding just outside. But then something surprising happened. Someone inside the party noticed the commotion outside. It was Jay's Beyoncé's husband, who had been quietly observing the evening from a distance. He heard that Kanye was waiting at the gate and decided to take matters into his own hands. Jays picked up his phone and made a quick call to the security team. His words were simple: "Let him in." It was a direct instruction, and just like that, the situation began to shift. Security, though unsure of Jay's reasoning, followed his command without hesitation. They stepped aside and allowed Kanye to enter the party. As Kanye walked past them, the atmosphere inside the house felt different. People noticed, but no one knew exactly how to react. Kanye had shown up uninvited, but Jay's decision to let him in had shifted the mood. The night was about to take an unexpected turn. The question now wasn't just about who had arrived, but why Jay's had chosen to let him in. What was behind the decision, and what would happen next at this unexpected gathering? The night had taken an unexpected turn. Kanye West, the controversial figure who had often found himself at the center of attention, had made an uninvited entrance into Beyoncé's private party. As he stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers spread through the crowd as people wondered what would happen next. Kanye wasn't just a celebrity. He was someone with a reputation for being unpredictable. His arrival, especially without an invitation, was bound to stir up some conversation. Inside the house, the energy was a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Beyoncé and Jay's, the hosts of the evening, had not expected Kanye to show up. Their relationship with him had been complicated in the past, especially after the infamous incident at the 2009 Live Video Music Awards. Many people assumed that the tension between the two men would keep them distant from one another. So when Kanye walked through the door, it was clear that this wasn't going to be just another quiet night. Kanye wasn't acting like someone who had been denied entry earlier. In fact, he seemed as comfortable as ever, moving through the party with the same confident stride he was known for. He exchanged brief words with a few people, most of whom seemed surprised to see him, but weren't about to make a scene. The music continued in the background, and the conversations around the room carried on. But there was a noticeable undercurrent of curiosity. What was Kanye doing here? And what did it mean for his relationship with Jay's and Beyoncé? Despite the tension, Kanye appeared unfazed. He didn't look like he was there to cause trouble or to make a statement. It almost seemed like he was simply there because he wanted to be. Perhaps it was his way of showing that, despite their past disagreements, he was still a part of the same world. He wasn't going to be excluded. Whatever the reason for his arrival, Kanye's presence was impossible to ignore. As the night went on, Kanye moved around the room, but he didn't seem to seek out Beyoncé or Jay's. He didn't rush to make his presence known in any big way. Instead, he appeared to float between groups, listening more than talking, watching the crowd around him. This wasn't a scene where he was trying to steal the spotlight, at least not in the usual way. He seemed content just to be there, part of the gathering but not necessarily the focus of it. Meanwhile, Jays and Beyoncé watched from a distance. Though neither of them made any sudden moves toward Kanye, they didn't appear to be bothered by his presence. Jace especially seemed to take everything in stride, his usual calm demeanor giving little away. It was clear that he had made a decision to allow Kanye into the party, but why? Was it an attempt at reconciliation, or was it simply a moment of letting the past go and moving forward? There were no easy answers, and the tension between them still lingered, even if it wasn't openly discussed. The night continued, but Kanye's bold move had already left a lasting impression. It wasn't just his uninvited entrance that everyone would remember. It was the way he made himself part of the evening without needing to demand attention. As Kanye West made his way into the party, no one could have guessed what was happening just moments before. Outside, the security guards were still in the midst of a tense situation. Kanye had shown up uninvited, and the guards, who had been trained to keep the party exclusive, were doing their best to stop him. They knew who Kanye was, but the rules were clear. If you weren't on the guest list, you couldn't enter. The guards stood firm, blocking the entrance as Kanye tried to convince them that he belonged. He wasn't known for being shy or timid, and this moment was no different. Standing at the gate, he spoke with confidence, almost as if he expected to be allowed in. He wasn't angry, but his voice carried a sense of authority. "I'm here for the party," Kanye said, not in the form of a request, but more like a statement of fact. It was as if he believed his presence was enough to justify entry. The guards, on the other hand, were in a difficult position. They couldn't just let anyone through, even if that person was as famous as Kanye. Their job was to ensure that only invited guests entered the event, and Kanye's name was nowhere to be found on the list. They had to follow the rules, no matter who stood before them. Despite the tension outside, Kanye didn't seem too bothered by the situation. He wasn't shouting or making a scene. He was calm and collected, trying to reason with the security. He had dealt with situations like this before, but this time it felt different. The guards stood their ground, repeating that they couldn't allow him in without an invitation. For a moment, it seemed like the situation would escalate. The crowd of people who had been waiting inside was unaware of what was happening at the gate, but they could sense that something was off. Then, out of nowhere, there was a change. Kanye took out his phone and made a quick call. He wasn't sure who would answer, but he seemed confident that his message would get through. Meanwhile, inside the party, everything appeared calm. Beyoncé and Jays were chatting with guests, completely unaware of what was happening outside. But soon, things would change. Just as the situation seemed stuck, the phone call reached its destination. Jays had been informed of the standoff, and he quickly made a decision. He spoke to the security team, his words clear and direct. "Let him in." With that, the guards were left with no choice but to step aside. It was a surprising turn of events, especially given the history between Jays and Kanye. But Jays' decision was final. Kanye was allowed to enter the party. As Kanye walked past the security guards, he flashed a brief smile. It wasn't a victory dance or a grand gesture. It was just a simple acknowledgement. He had made it inside, but he wasn't about to cause a scene. Instead, he moved forward with the same calm confidence that had helped him get past the security. Inside, the music played on, and the party continued, but the earlier tension lingered. What would happen now? Would this unexpected entrance be the beginning of something new, or would it just be another chapter in the complicated history between Kanye, Jays, and Bianca? Only time would tell. Inside the house, the atmosphere seemed to shift as Kanye West stepped past the security and into the party. People glanced at him as he walked in, some in shock, others unsure of what to make of his sudden presence. Yet there was one thing that stood out above everything else: Jays' calm reaction. While many guests were left whispering in curiosity, Jays remained composed, not fazed by the unexpected turn of events. It was as if this moment was just another part of his world, one where surprises didn't throw him off balance. Everyone knew that Jays and Kanye's relationship had been complicated over the years. Their bond had seen many highs and lows, with public disagreements and tensions that made headlines. But this night, right here, seemed to be different. While many might have expected Jays to be upset or to confront Kanye, his decision was the opposite. He had chosen to let him in. No drama, no confrontation, just a calm response to a situation that could have easily gotten out of hand. What made this decision even more intriguing was the way Jays had handled it. Instead of making a scene or drawing attention to the fact that Kanye had shown up uninvited, Jays acted quietly. He didn't announce his choice to let Kanye in with any fanfare. It was a simple phone call to the security guards. In an instant, Kanye was inside, blending into the crowd like any other guest. There were no dramatic words exchanged, no grand gestures. It was as if Jays had decided that whatever had happened in the past between him and Kanye was in the past, at least for tonight. For those at the party, the change in atmosphere was subtle but noticeable. The tension that had been present outside started to fade, and people slowly went back to enjoying themselves. Yet the question remained, why had Jays made this decision? Was it an act of forgiveness, an attempt to move on from the past? Or was it just a way of handling a situation in the most practical way possible? Jays wasn't one to reveal his thoughts easily, so no one could be sure. As Kanye made his way through the room, he didn't seem to be making a big statement or trying to grab anyone's attention. He wasn't the life of the party. He didn't draw a crowd of people eager to talk to him. Instead, he moved with quiet confidence, observing the gathering as if he were simply another part of the evening. He spoke briefly to a few people, but his presence didn't overwhelm the space. The party continued as planned, with the music still playing and conversations flowing. Jays, on the other hand, remained mostly in the background. He continued to mingle with other guests, but there was a noticeable calm about him. He wasn't distracted by Kanye's arrival, nor was he worried about what anyone else might be thinking. It was clear that Jays had made his peace with the situation, whatever it might have been. As the night went on, it became apparent that the real story wasn't just about Kanye's unexpected entrance. It was about Jays' quiet choice to welcome him back, even in the midst of a complicated past. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just a decision made with calmness and grace. And for those who observed, it was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful actions don't need to be seen by everyone to have an impact. As Kanye West stepped into the party, the energy in the room subtly changed. The smooth flow of conversations and the background music seemed to take on a different tone. Even though Kanye wasn't making a big scene, his sudden, uninvited presence was enough to shift the atmosphere. People turned their heads, their whispers filling the room as they tried to understand why he was there. Some were surprised, others simply curious. It wasn't every day that a celebrity like Kanye showed up where he wasn't expected. But Kanye wasn't the type to let awkwardness slow him down. He didn't shy away from attention, but this time he moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. His face didn't show any sign of hesitation. If anything, he appeared as though he belonged, as though his presence was just another part of the night's plan. The people around him tried to act as if nothing had changed, but it was clear that the air had thickened with a quiet tension. He didn't make any grand gestures or rush to speak with Jays or Beyoncé. He wasn't there to demand the spotlight or draw attention to himself. Instead, he moved casually, greeting familiar faces and exchanging brief words with a few guests. He wasn't trying to take over the room or make it about him. It was almost as if he was waiting for the night to unfold, and he was simply part of it. Yet for everyone who noticed him, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. People were unsure how to react to his arrival. Was this the beginning of a new chapter, or was it just another moment in the unpredictable history of Kanye and Jays' relationship? Inside the house, Beyoncé and Jays watched from a distance. They were calm, but it was hard to ignore the slight shift in their expressions. Neither of them went out of their way to approach Kanye. They didn't rush over to greet him or make a big deal of his presence. Instead, they remained in their own conversations, as if they were used to moments like this. Their quiet composure didn't go unnoticed, and for some, it only added to the mystery of the situation. As Kanye moved through the party, he didn't seek out Jays or Beyoncé. He didn't appear uncomfortable, but there was a certain distance in the air. It was clear that while he was there, he wasn't going to be the center of attention. He wasn't trying to rekindle old friendships or start new conversations. For Kanye, this night was more about showing up than anything else. He wanted to make a statement, but it wasn't a loud one. The night carried on, but the unease didn't entirely leave. There was something unspoken in the room, something that hung in the air as the guests continued to mingle. While the party was still lively and filled with laughter, Kanye's unexpected presence reminded everyone that not everything was as simple as it seemed. The question wasn't whether Kanye had the right to be there, but rather what his presence meant for the future of his relationship with Jays and Beyoncé. Would things return to normal, or was this just another awkward chapter in their complicated history? The party continued, and Kanye West's unexpected arrival had become just another part of the night, but there was still something hanging in the air. The conversations went on, and the music played softly in the background, but a quiet tension lingered. People in the room couldn't help but wonder, what did Kanye's presence really mean? More importantly, what was going through the minds of Jays and Beyoncé. The couple hadn't made any direct moves toward Kanye since he walked through the door. It was almost as if they were letting the night unfold without reacting too much. From a distance, it was clear that Kanye wasn't there to make a scene. He wasn't pushing himself into the spotlight. Instead, he appeared content to stay in the background, just like any other guest. But his arrival had clearly altered the mood. There was no immediate conflict, no shouting, no drama. Yet the room felt different. People were more cautious with their words, their glances often shifting toward the trio. Kanye, Jace, and Beyoncé were at the center of the party, but in a way, they were also off to the side, quietly observing the scene around them. Jays, as usual, kept his cool. He moved through the crowd with ease, talking to guests and enjoying the night. His expressions were unreadable, as if he were aware of everything going on, but choosing not to react. For Jays, the night didn't need to be about big moments or public displays. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his presence filled the room. The way he carried himself made it clear that, despite any past issues, he wasn't going to let one uninvited guest ruin the evening. Beyoncé, too, remained composed. She didn't make any extra effort to interact with Kanye, but she didn't seem upset either. She simply went about her evening, talking to friends and smiling when needed, yet still distant enough to suggest that her thoughts were elsewhere. She wasn't openly reacting to Kanye's presence, but she didn't need to. Her calmness spoke volumes. There was no sign of anger or frustration. There was just quiet acceptance. The tension was there, but it was more in the air than in any of her actions. For Kanye, the night seemed to be a balancing act. He wasn't ignoring the tension, but he also wasn't letting it define him. He moved through the party with the same level of quiet confidence that had carried him through the security standoff earlier. He didn't force conversations, and he didn't act like he was trying to change anything. Instead, he let the night unfold around him. If anyone noticed the oddness of the situation, he didn't seem concerned by it. He was simply present, and for now that seemed enough. As the evening wore on, the silent tension remained, like an invisible thread connecting the three of them. No one could say for sure what would come next, but it was clear that something had shifted. What was once a fractured relationship between Kanye and Jays had turned into something quieter, more complicated. Neither side seemed ready to confront the past, but neither was eager to walk away from it completely. The night was unfolding with uncertainty, and it was impossible to predict what might happen next. As the night wore on, the energy at Beyoncé's party began to settle into a calm rhythm. People continued to mingle and laugh, but there was an underlying current of curiosity surrounding Kanye's presence. No one could ignore the fact that he was there, uninvited, but things had stayed relatively quiet. No one wanted to make a scene. The guests seemed unsure about how to approach the situation, and many chose to keep their distance, not wanting to draw attention to the awkwardness. But there was one moment when everything shifted. Towards the back of the room, near a quiet corner, Kanye and Jays found themselves standing together. It wasn't dramatic. No one had made an announcement or pointed out their sudden proximity. It just happened. It was a small shift, but it was a moment that would later be remembered as a turning point. The two men stood a few feet apart, their eyes meeting for the briefest of seconds. Neither of them rushed to speak. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the history of their complex relationship. Over the years, their friendship had been tested time and again, full of misunderstandings and disagreements, public feuds, and private tensions. But in that moment, as they stood together in the corner of the room, it seemed like neither man was ready to speak openly about the past. They just stood there, acknowledging each other in silence. It wasn't until Kanye took a deep breath that the quiet between them finally broke. His voice was calm but direct. "We've had our differences," he said, looking at Jays, "but I'm here now." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't an accusation either. It was simply a statement. Kanye was acknowledging the history they shared without trying to change it, without forcing an apology or a resolution. Jays looked at him for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, with the same quiet confidence he always carried, he spoke. "It's all part of the journey," he said, his tone measured, as if he were considering the weight of his words carefully. There was no anger in his voice, but there was no rush to make peace either. It was as if he understood that the past couldn't be erased in a single conversation, but perhaps in time it could be moved past. The two men stood there for a while longer, the conversation drifting into smaller topics. Nothing too deep, nothing too heavy. It was more of a shared understanding than a formal discussion. For a moment, it felt like they had reached some sort of unspoken truce. though neither of them had said anything that could be called a definitive step forward. The tension that had been in the air for much of the night seemed to ease, but it was still unclear whether this quiet moment would lead to anything more substantial. As the conversation came to a natural end, Kanye gave a small nod, as if acknowledging Jay's words. He didn't force a handshake or any other gesture. It was just a mutual understanding between two people who had been through a lot together. And as he turned to walk back into the crowd, it was clear that while things might not be resolved, the night had brought them one step closer to understanding each other. What happened next was uncertain, but for now this moment of quiet conversation was enough. As the evening stretched on, the atmosphere of the party slowly began to shift once again. What had started as a night filled with uncertainty and tension was now winding down to a quieter pace. People were starting to say their goodbyes, gathering their things and preparing to leave. The lively chatter had dimmed to softer conversations, and the music was now a low hum in the background. Kanye West, having been part of the night for hours, seemed to be reflecting on the moments that had passed. He stood near the door, quietly observing the guests as they left. He didn't seem to be in a rush, nor was he trying to make a dramatic exit. Instead, Kanye appeared thoughtful, as if the events of the evening had left him with something to process. For all the attention he had drawn when he first arrived uninvited, the way he was leaving now felt much quieter, more understated. There were no grand gestures, no crowds of people following him out. He simply stood there, looking out across the room, his mind seemingly far away. As guests filed out, Beyoncé and Jay's remained in their own corner, chatting with a few close friends. They weren't focused on Kanye anymore, but there was still something unsaid between them all. After all that had happened that night, it seemed like they had come to a place of quiet acceptance. Their attention was elsewhere, but the underlying tension that had marked the evening was beginning to fade. It was as if the party had run its course, and so too had the unresolved issues. Finally, Kanye made his move. He wasn't trying to be secretive, but there was something about the way he slipped out of the room that felt purposeful. He didn't make eye contact with Jay's or Beyoncé as he passed, but it wasn't because he was avoiding them. Rather, it was as if he knew that the moment had passed. There was no need for big speeches, no need for any final words. His presence at the party had already made its statement, and now it was time to leave. He gave a simple nod to a few people on his way out, but his goodbye was as quiet as his entrance had been. When he stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the evening seemed to lift from his shoulders. It wasn't a victory, and it wasn't a loss. It was simply the end of a chapter, one that had been full of tension and unexpected twists. He wasn't sure what would happen next with Jades and Beyoncé, but for tonight, the silence between them had been enough. As Kanye walked away from the party, he didn't look back. It wasn't because he had to prove anything, but because he knew that sometimes the most important moments aren't the ones that make the most noise. Sometimes it's the quiet conversations, the simple nods, and the unspoken understanding that truly matter. Tonight, he had made his presence known in a way that wasn't loud or dramatic, but it had left an impression nonetheless. What came next would be up to time, and time, as always, would tell its own story.